Hello and welcome to this episode of Latitude, in which you're looking at the raging conflict between the Arabs and the Palestinians and their backers, the Hamas, in the Middle East, which has obviously become one of the most serious confrontations between Israel and the Hamas in particular, and the people of Palestine obviously suffering in it. We've seen thousands of rockets and airstrikes taking place. We've seen hundreds of people being taken dead, many more displaced, I believe more than 50,000. And the international community is still giving lukewarm messages to de escalate. We have two experts with us. We have Professor Kumaraswamy from the JNU, who's a Middle East expert, and we have the one and only Middle Eastern correspondent in India who is well informed and has the sentiments both with India and the Middle Eastern world, Dr. Awwad. I'll start with you, Professor Kumaraswamy. You've written a fantastic article recently in the newspapers.
Thank you very much.
Explaining the various dimensions of the Israel Hamas conflict. But two or three questions emerge from that. One is that you have mentioned that Israel is facing multiple challenges. Now, what are these multiple challenges other than the ones that Mr. Netanyahu is pointing his fingers at? That is essentially the guerrilla forces of the Hamas and their enormous firepower, which, though has not brought about the kind of deaths in Israel that the Palestinians are facing because of Israeli airstrikes, but obviously has been very unsettling for Israel. So could you explain that what are the enemies and the threats that Netanyahu sees other than his own political challenges at home?
Okay, thank you very much. The multiple challenges in the sense, previously Israel fought Gaza Strip with Hamas alone. I know if you look at all the three times since Israel vacated from the Gaza Strip in 2005, in 2008 and 9, 2012 and 2014, it was between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But this time around, the conflict has escalated beyond the Gaza Strip. It has now, for the first time, you are seeing violence in the West Bank, which never happened in the last three times. It was relatively quiet. You did not even see demonstrations in West Bank, which indicated the distance between Fatah and Hamas among the Palestinians. But today, that is not the case. You see widespread protests in the West Bank. And that is not enough. You see protests within Israel. The Israeli Arabs have refrained from interfering in Palestinian intifada. They supported it politically, but they never took part actively. There are one or two exceptions, but otherwise the Palestinians expressed their opposition, but they never visibly demonstrated in violence. But today, what is happening is there is violence between the Israelis, the Arabs on the one side and the Jews on the other side. You have even seen arson attacks, desecration of graveyards, and destruction of a synagogue, and even lynching, which is something never happened in Israel's history from 1948. This is a very unprecedented. Because if you know, in all the countries, you can fight an enemy from outside, but fighting an enemy within is always a problematic.
Absolutely.
The Israelis finding it difficult to fight the extremists among the Jews and extremists among the Arabs, and that's the third part of it. The fourth dimension is there are rocket attacks from the northern side, from Lebanon and Syria. Fortunately, so far the numbers are very less, and also they are coming only from Palestinian elements in these two countries. Meaning, Hezbollah has not joined the war, or the pro and anti-Syrian forces in Syria have not joined the war. But in spite of that, you have four fronts. If this is not enough, you have even among the Jews, there is a difference. People who support Netanyahu, people who don't support Netanyahu. Both within the political context and in the context of forming a government. So if you look at all of them together, this is, one of the most difficult times Israel has faced since 1948. The crisis is not only with the other, but also crisis within.
Oh, well, not exactly a very happy situation for the international community to be able to do anything about it. I think the big question for them is, where is the starting point? Where do they begin the engagement with, other than Prime Minister Netanyahu, who doesn't seem to want to relent? I mean, if the latest messages that are coming in from all over the world, he seems to be standing up to even President Biden. And that is leads me to the question to Dr. Awwad, who knows Middle East better than probably we all will ever do. Dr. Awwad, sir, now I get a feeling that forget the international community, even the Arab world is divided over who and how much support they can lend to. Because there seems to be finger pointing within the Arab world about those who have decided to engage with Israel and those who are still holding up. And that makes the situation even more complicated. So, could you throw more light on it?
Thank you, Maruf, for having me in your program with Professor Kumaraswamy. As usual, thank you for the introduction as well. I think we have to you distinguish between a corrupted Arab leaders who have been the cause of all the problem of the Palestine, because most of the Arab leaders tried, even Islamic leader, in fact, tried to ride on the Islamic wave in the world and trying to take the lead, or publicly, but under the table, definitely they are doing the other way around. That's why nobody trusts those leaders who have been forced into a kind of a treaty with Israel, because President Trump and Kushner, his son-in-law, and Netanyahu thought that we can sideline the Palestinian cause. But if you look at the streets all over the world, globally, it has been, in support of a justice to the Palestinian. The fact of the matter is, as I fully agree with my Professor Kumaraswamy, whom I have been with him a couple of times, many times. In fact, the point I'm trying to raise here, it is not enemy within. It is the way you look at it, whether you are an apartheid regime or you are seriously giving democracy to all of your citizens. If you consider the Palestinian of 1948 who accepted the Israeli identity as second or third citizen, and you bring settlers from all over the world and you give them the Palestinian land, building them, legalizing, and give them an authority to have their own house at the cost of a Palestinian. Definitely there will be some kind of an uprising, whether it is a peaceful uprising, whether it is a violence uprising, as had Hamas have taken the full advantage. The issue here is not the issue of Palestine, Hamas and Netanyahu. The issue here is Netanyahu himself. This is his war. He's committing a crime because he has some internal problem publicly, politically. No, we knows that he did not win the election. He has to face jail inside because the opposition given 1 month to make a government. If they form the government, he loses immunity. He will go to jail like Lombard and everybody, Olmert. So the problem here lies actually, Maruf, is that he used this episode of Sheikh al-Jarrah province within East Jerusalem of the near to Al-Aqsa Mosque for his full advantage, and attacked the prayers inside the mosque at the time of the holiest night in the Islamic world. So that the Hamas have given him an ultimatum that if you don't stop, we will attack, we will retaliate. So he provoked more, which have given the upper hand of Hamas to go and attack. And now he have opened all doors hell on the Palestinian inside Gaza, which is, as you know, the most congested, condensed public, place in the world, and it just sieged from all the direction we know. And that's, yes, the wars have been fought. It is a different kind of war this time. And the Arabs also bear the sole responsibility of creating this problem, as much as the international community who have failed the Palestinian to solve the problem. What we have seen repeatedly, war, perpetual provocation for a permanent war. That's, I can put it and sum it up in those nights. Unless and until the Israeli realize.
Professor Awwad, Dr. Awwad, I'll come back to you a little later. I need to understand a bit more from Mr. Kumaraswamy. Professor Kumaraswamy, sir, how is it that the international community has made various proposals for trying to come to a way forward, but they haven't made any dent? And now I believe the Biden administration has privately expressed exasperation with the Middle East case because they believe they can't really sort it out. So do you see any role for the international community, or do you see Netanyahu bombing the Israelis, bombing the Palestinians within the area surrounding Israel to high heavens?
Both Israel and Hamas are not in a mood for a ceasefire. Let's accept it very clearly. Because both of them want to consolidate their position, domestic reasons. Netanyahu among the Israelis, Hamas among the Palestinians. But what can the international community do? But no, international community is expressing its anguish, displeasure, everything, but it is ineffective. If you look at across the globe, let's eliminate country by country. A country which has an enormous influence over Hamas is Iran. But Iran and the peace process don't go together. Turkey could have played a role, but Turkey is also moving in the opposite directions. But if you look at the Arab countries, especially in the Gulf, are moving closer to Israel, and therefore they do not have a leverage over Hamas. China and Russia are talking to Hamas, but they do not have the heavy lifting capacity. And the only regional country which can play a role, which is constructive, is Egypt. So Egypt can play a role for three reasons. One, historical association with various peace process, is engagement with Hamas, and third, geographic proximity. But even Egypt cannot do without the American backing. Biden wants to mediate, but the Biden-Netanyahu relationship is still rocky, mainly over Iran, and they are yet to establish a modus vivendi. And therefore, while Biden wants to do something, as of now, is not in a position to effectively use his leverage.
Well, you've covered the Middle East country by country and very comprehensively so. We'll come back after a break to look at what really could be the way forward there. And there are some suggestions that possibly India could be the honest broker there. But that after a break. Welcome back. We are looking at the recent flare-up and the confrontation between Israel and Palestine, and the Palestinians, who are clearly at a major disadvantage physically, militarily, and in terms of the kind of support they can hope for, even in the Arab world. But what could be the way forward? Dr. Awwad, you're a big champion of issues that need to be addressed in all honesty. And I'm with you on that, some of the strong points you've made. But can you explain to me, why did Israel decide, and Netanyahu in particular, to suddenly flare things up at Al-Aqsa Mosque on, as you said, on the holiest day of Ramadan, and also more importantly, the Israeli judiciary system that obviously has compromised its credibility by giving all these verdicts which are very pro-Israeli government. So really, where do the Palestinians go? What is their hope? Who can support them except for rocket fire from Hamas? And while the Israelis call them terrorists, what the Israelis are doing, whether displacing people or using massive air power, often against unarmed people, is not attributed to by the world to terrorism, because the definition of terrorism seems to be defined at the UN, which in itself, to my mind, has always been an overrated debating society which is toothless.
Thank you, Maruf. Thank you for your words again. And the point you are raised is very important, actually speaking. That's what the whole world been asking for the last 73 years. After the establishment of the United Nations, the first question was the division of Palestine, which has been divided into 55% were given to the Israelis and 45% to the Palestinians. Ever since, we did not have any peace. So because you have not implemented the UN Security Council resolution, which in regards to the division and the two-state solution. So over the years, we have seen that there have been annihilation of total Palestine. So Netanyahu, to be honest, he belonged to the right wing, like Sharon. We know that he is not a man of peace. We know that he does not want peace with the Palestinian. He has created a rift within the society of Israel. He has made that the right-wing Israelis are against peace with the Arab. After the Oslo Agreement in 1993, in fact, there was 55% of the Israelis were willing to have peace with the Arab. And now when the right wing came, we had only 10, 15%. So I am proudly to say, I am with the 10, 15% of the Israeli who wanted to have peace with the Arab, because we need to live together. You need to coexist. What happened in Jerusalem is the settlers from 125,000 to 835,000, according to Israelis' own statistic, which means that they have increased tenfold. And where is the Palestinian? There is no house for the Palestinians. They have no right to claim their own home. They cannot build up a bathroom. So unless and until you make peace as an objective strategy for you, there is no peace. The international community recognized that this is under occupation. 1967, it is a Palestinian under occupation. As per the international law, they need the protection from the international community. Corrupted government of the Palestinians have led to this crisis to develop and to aggravate. I met with Mr. Arafat, late Arafat, 20 years ago. I interviewed him when Netanyahu was the first prime minister. And I asked him a simple question: what do you expect from Netanyahu? You know what? Maruf, he left up his hand 3 times, looking at my eyes like this and returning his face 3 times. And he told me nothing. I met with Mahmoud Abbas 10 years ago. And I asked him the same question: what do you expect from Netanyahu? And Mahmoud Abbas openly said, talk for talk. If you want to talk for talk, like Ishaq Shamir, when they took us to Madrid conference and he said we can talk with the Arab for 20, 30 years, that means you are not willing to implement the resolution of a 2-state solution. Unless and until you agree that you want to coexist, there is no coexistence among the states. Become existential forces, either you or us.
Okay, very, very strong points made by you. I'll come back to you about the political agendas of Mr. Netanyahu and the Palestinian leadership. But Professor Kumaraswamy, now here is a question which I think you're best placed to answer. There is an argument that India could be an honest broker in this entire conflict because India has always supported the Palestinian cause. Yasser Arafat, the number of times he came to India, was given head of state treatment. India recognized Israel in 1950, but started engagement with Israel with various diplomatic missions from 1992 onwards. Today, Israel is one of India's big defense suppliers. Mr. Modi and his Netanyahu seems to be close in more ways than one. So, do you think India could play a role, or is there the typical Indian reluctance? You want to keep out of mediation because then somebody will want to mediate on the Kashmir issue. And if not India, then who are the people who could be taking the place of the US? Because Mr. Biden has apparently indicated that he's had enough of these Middle East conflicts. America's had enough of it. America wants to move on. So could China become the one? Because China has explained that there is a hesitancy in the UN by one country to support the Chinese proposal of a two-state model. Or could the Russians come in as they came in Syria? Where do you think the answer lies?
You know, it's very nice to hear that India has good relations with both the parties, so we could play a mediating role. You know, it's an ego massaging. It's very happy to know we could play a role. My humble opinion, we do not have the capacity, not the diplomatic skill, not the political leverage, nor the wherewithal. So let's not even try that. It's very pleasing. And if relation is good enough, there are so many countries who have relation with Israel and Palestinians. We are not the only one. And if you look at all the countries which have an embassy in Israel, from Emirates, they can play a role. If that's a category, Emirates actually give you financial assistance to Palestine, which India could never even imagine. So let's not get into this. India simply cannot play a role, and we don't have the capacity. And playing a role means involvement at the prime ministerial level. It cannot be sent to some joint secretary in the ministry. It cannot be done. It will have to be done at the prime ministerial level to establish. And does our prime minister has the time for all these things? No, he is fighting for COVID constantly. So therefore, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the time, we don't have the expertise to do any of these things.
Good.
Even in Sri Lanka, we didn't mediate. Even in Nepal, we didn't mediate. Even in Afghanistan, we couldn't do it. These are all our immediate neighborhoods. Let's not go far away. Number one.
Good. I'm glad you've dismissed that argument, which comes very strongly by some academics and political scientists. And I wanted somebody of your stature to put
Yeah,
it.
because it's these are all these are all very ego massaging trip, and I can also play a role. It's
Okay,
like saying I
okay,
also have all
okay.
the things I can fight Mike Tyson type. So I
Okay,
think
let me go to Dr. Awwad. Dr. Awwad, uh, there are various options being suggested for a kind of moving forward solution. You know, the two-state solution, the the fact that Jordan could continue to be one of the guarantors of the Palestinians. But there is a problem that I don't seem to understand. How can you have a state within a state? And how can you have a state which doesn't have the trappings of a state? And one of the trappings of a state is armed forces. So, where do we see, is this the usual argument about giving autonomy and settling the matter? And to what extent will autonomy help whenever, if the Israelis please, they come down with a ton of bricks on the Palestinians?
Maruf, I will be guilty by history that if I have to glorify and reward the thief of a nation to allow him to replace another nation, that's unfair to anybody. There is a resistance, there is occupation. You have to defend yourself by all means. Peacefully, I always agree on the peaceful resistance, but not on a violent or anything on that sort. So therefore, you have the legitimate right. That is what even stated in the international law, as long as you wanted to defend your country. So I think what we need is decolonize Israel. Come back to the previous map you have made. Make the two-state division. That's the best solution, the best way out. There is no question that you can annihilate the Palestinian. There is 1.6 million Palestinians who agreed to take the Israeli identity who are living inside the occupied territories in Palestine. Not only the Hamas, there are 6 million Palestinians outside refugees who are denied their entry. Anybody is willing to receive them or accept them? No. They have to go back to their home. There is nobody. If you are having your home, nobody is willing to somebody take your home and you say, okay, chalo, it is time, half past, let it be chalega. No. There is no question about it. We need to sit down across the table, sit down and discuss. Every country can use its own pressure, their own tactic to bring them to the table to discuss. Everybody is involved. What you are happening now, you are increasing extremism, terrorism, fundamentalists around you and around the world, where people will take full advantage of this. We have to avoid this kind of terrorism coming into the views. We need to support a two-state solution. You need to implement the UN Security Council resolution. Otherwise, there is no end to this war. And there is no question that Israel can be only for the Jew. It is Al-Aqsa is important. Jerusalem is important for Christian, for Muslim, for Jew, and we live for centuries, and we are going to live for centuries again. It's just a matter of bringing back the peace-loving nations together who are willing within Israel as well, and come with the Arabs, and we can live. We are belonging to the same father, and thanks to Ishaq who have made them Jew, and thanks to Ismail who made us Muslim. But at the end of the day, we are from the same father.
Well, that is a short summary of the history of the Arab world. But I think, to me, the bigger question is that I think we can only move forward if the UN becomes less toothless and the international community is serious about addressing it. But I think right now, all we are getting is platitudes. And until this conflict continues, we will see more discussions on the subject. But thank you very much, sir, for both your wisdom. And thank you very much for watching. And this is a subject that is the longest going on conflict in the world. And I don't think it's going to end tomorrow. Until our next episode, goodbye.